Hello, everyone. We are live and recording. My name is Kellyanne, and I'm a bookseller at Mysterious Galaxy. And tonight I am here to introduce you to our lovely authors who we get to host. We are celebrating not one, but two fantastic authors and two fantastic middle grade books. Tonight we're hosting Chris Barron, who you might have recognized because we have hosted him for events before in the past in the olden days at the old store. We're really excited to welcome him back, even if it's virtually. We will be getting him in store soon to get signed books for you guys, so that's really exciting. Tonight, we are here to celebrate his newest book, which came out last month, The Magical Imperfect. We also are hosting Rajani LaRocca, who is an omnivorous reader turned omnivorous writer. She's written fiction and nonfiction, poetry and prose, and picture books. We're here to talk about tonight her newest book, Much Ado About Baseball, which also came out this year. So you guys are not here to listen to me ramble about how wonderful our authors are. But before I turn off my screen and get going, just a little introduction to Crowdcast. If you guys have not done events with us before, on the right-hand side, you will see the lovely chat section, which you guys have all found perfectly fine. Right below us, you'll see a green button that says Buy Books. It'll take you to the Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore webpage for this event tonight, and you can buy both of the books discussed tonight and get signed books from Chris and signed personalized book plates from Rajani. Last but not least, below that, at the bottom of the screen, there's a button that says Ask a Question. If you click that, you can do exactly that and ask either of our lovely authors whatever question you would like this evening. So make great use of that. Upvote any questions you really, really want to see answered. And with that, I'm going to hop off the screen and pass it off to our authors. Bye, everyone. Have a great event.
Thanks.
Hooray!
Hooray. Well, I'll start by saying that I'm so happy to do this event with you, Rajani, and we are, close friends. And I'm glad to celebrate with you and so happy to see everyone here. And I hope we can make this a fun, spot of time in your evening. And I'm really thankful because I spent a lot of time going to Eastern Coast events. So I'm so happy to have you. And I know it's a bit of a sacrifice because it's so late. So
no, this is a joy. I'm so excited. So for those of you who don't know, Chris and I have been book friends since 2018 when we were in the same debut group for our debut novels, Midsummer's Mayhem and All of Me. And our first books came out on the same day, right? June 11th. 2019, and these books this year came out the same day, Much Ado About Baseball and The Magical Imperfect, which I think somewhere on my shelf back there. So yeah, we're weirdly book twins. So it is a complete joy to be celebrating our books together, and I'm happy to do a West Coast event because I know, goodness knows, Chris does enough East Coast events. So the magic of the internet allows us to do this.
yeah.
Yes, every writer does need a book twin, especially one who's as awesome as Chris.
Well, I almost feel like we could just say, what questions does everyone have? But maybe we talk a little bit about, I don't know, I think we have so much we could say, but I think maybe just the writing process for us. How did these books come around, and get a little bit about your process of writing it?
Yeah, so I guess I can just introduce this book, Much Ado About Baseball, to folks who are not familiar with it. So this is a companion novel to my debut, Midsummer's Mayhem. Can you still hear me? My earphones are doing weird things. Okay, great. And it features two protagonists, 12-year-olds, Trish and Ben, who are math competition rivals who end up on the same summer baseball team. And they kind of can't stand each other, but they have to find a way to work together for the good of the team. And the team is terrible. They cannot win a single game until the kids encounter an older kid who is kind of really good at baseball, weirdly good at baseball. And he says that his family's running a snack shop that'll help their team come together. And they're like, fine. So they start eating the snacks, and then they each get a mysterious book of math puzzles that shows up in their mailboxes. And then they start solving the puzzles separately. And as they start solving the puzzles, their team starts to win and win and win. But then they each get to a puzzle that they can't solve, and something really terrible happens. So they've got to figure out whether they can work together when it counts or if they're going to strike out. No, this book this book is a companion novel to Midsummer's Mayhem, and Midsummer's Mayhem is kind of like a middle grade take on A Midsummer Night's Dream and baking. And there's some magical people in Midsummer's Mayhem, and I wanted the other side of the magical competition to be represented in this book. And so that's why it involved math and science and sports. And weirdly, I always thought of this as a dual POV book, but then when I started to write it, I had a really, really hard time figuring out how to make it all work with 2 points of view. And so then I tried really hard to make it a single POV book. And I picked one kid, and then I picked the other kid. And then ultimately I was like, you know what? No, it has to be dual POV. And then I found a way to make it work. So it was an interesting writing process. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, no, I mean, I love hearing you talk about it, because I think, doing some collaborative stuff that we've done together, knowing your process and how much time and thought you put into like character point of view. And I'm the same way. It means a lot to me. I'm off camera, but now I'm back. So a little bit about Magical Imperfect. It's set against the backdrop of the 1989 World Series in the Bay Area and the Loma Prieta earthquake that happens during that time. And it's about this town, this town of Shipshaven, which is a fictional town where people immigrated through Angel Island. A lot of people obviously know about Ellis Island, but 500,000 people also came through Angel Island, which is on the San Francisco Bay. And it's about a group of people who formed a town where they lived kind of in community together, this really diverse population. And the story's about really the ancestors of those people that came across, Eitan and Malia, the grandchildren. And they're both outcasts. Eitan is selectively mute since his mother had to leave for her depression, so she had to be taken care of medically. And when she left, she took her words with her, his words with her, and he stopped talking. And then Malia, who is known as the creature because of really severe skin disease. And she has to homeschool. It's about how they meet and become friends. And it's about the old world and the new world coming together and the magic that's there and how they kind of heal together. And the process of writing this book was really fun because it was such a good mix of exploring what immigration meant, what learning about Angel Island. I had maps. I had piles of books. I know you know this process, and many of you know this process, like a million sticky notes everywhere, like, oh, look this up, find out about this. And I read some incredible research books about Angel Island immigration. And in the middle of it all, I found out actually that my own grandparents came through Ellis Island, So it just really became such a book of the heart. And it was just really a pleasure to write it. And the other thing I would say about this book in particular, whereas All of Me was such a singular movement for Ari, who's coming of age and becoming, this young man and trying to learn acceptance. This book had so many characters, so intergenerational, that it was a real challenge to keep that going and not be overly complex. Because I think it's a very complex story, but it really kept me on my toes as a writer because I had to write in several streams and then try to connect them the best I could. It was really quite an interesting experience. Yeah. Well,
I mean, it's a beautiful book, so you pulled it off clearly. So, yay.
Yeah, it's been, and it's interesting too to talk about it because I'm learning more all the time as we go. I have a question for you about your process though, and this is something that I love, and we talk a lot about fantasy, and the reason I'm saying that is because you're about world building.
Oh, right? Am I?
Well, I love that you're, maybe we're all, marveled out, but it's like this idea of like the continuity being in the same universe. So in your book, in this book, and obviously Midsummer's Mayhem, you've got the world building of comedy. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So Comedy, Massachusetts is where both Midsummer's Mayhem and Much Ado About Baseball are set. And it is a thinly veiled version of the town where I live, which is Concord, Massachusetts. And in the first book, Midsummer's Mayhem, you learn why so many famous people are from this town. Now, I live in Concord, Massachusetts, and it is the home of Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Louisa May Alcott, and one of the first battles of the Revolutionary War. So there's a lot of history in this town and a lot of literary history in this town, which is really cool. And when I wrote the first book, I have an explanation for that. And the explanation is that magical people selected this town and selected people in this town to make them really good at certain things. And so there's kind of like a war between magical people to figure out what kinds of things are going to flourish here. And so that was a backdrop of Midsummer's Mayhem. There's an entire adventure that involves baking and magical places in the woods and all kinds of stuff. But the big picture, right? Just like in A Midsummer Night's Dream, the big picture story is that there is a fight between the king and the queen of the fairies over a boy. And that's why the events of that entire play unfold. And the events of Midsummer's Mayhem also occur because there is a fight between the king and the queen of the fairies. So the queen of the fairies, Titania, you see in Midsummer's Mayhem. And then that means that Team Oberon shows up in this book. So I set this book during the same summer in the same town and with different characters. So while the events of Midsummer's Mayhem are going on, something else is happening with these kids. And it's because of this fight. And there is a competition in the town kind of for the soul of the town, so to speak. So I had fun with that, but I will tell you that in writing this book, in writing the first book, because it was Mimi's story, the main character in Midsummer's Mayhem, I knew what that book would be from the very beginning, and I knew where we were started and where we ended up, and I knew why the fairies were interested in her. With this book, I knew I had two protagonists. I knew it had something to do with math and baseball and salty snacks. But for the longest time, I was like, I'm not sure what the goal, why is this happening? And it took me a while. Once I figured out what the magical people wanted, then I was able to integrate this whole story into the same town and the same summer.
I love that because, okay, first of all, the fantasy idea, the land of fairy, right? The idea that the magical people are at war and human beings are just a part of that. They're stuck in the middle and they're phasing in and out of that magic, which is passing over them and through them. And sometimes they're aware, sometimes they're not. It's like the basis of so much great literature. And I love how you put that in. And that makes me want to know a little bit more about this because both of our books have a lot of baseball.
Yes.
Which is it's not that it's the opposite of magic. It's just because baseball is magic. Baseball people don't get mad. I don't mean it's not. But just that it's very all American. It's very normal. We all play baseball. And it's an interesting contrast. Where did baseball come in for you in your book?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I knew, so in Midsummer's Mayhem, we learned that Titania likes sweet things. So she runs a sweet shop and a bakery. And she also is a patron of literature and music and cooking, baking, that kind of thing. And we learned that Oberon is in favor of salty things and is also a patron of math and science and sports. And so that is also part of the war. So Titania, of course, is interested in this girl who is kind of musical and is also a really amazing baker. And the kids that Oberon, Team Oberon cares about are the ones that are good at sports and math and science. And these kids are good at all those things. So I picked, so I could have chosen any sport, but I chose baseball because we love baseball in my house. And my son played baseball all the way through high school. So we've had a lot of baseball experience. I never played baseball, but I am a baseball mom. So, I remember.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, I know for Magical Imperfect, looking at what happened during that time and what a role the World Series played because it was the Battle of the Bay, the A's and the Giants were playing, and the earthquake actually happening during Game 3, and
between the bridges between those two places,
right,
like that bridge was affected. It's like crazy. It's crazy.
Right, and as a poet, like the metaphorical nature of it is off the charts, right? So I'm like, wow. But for the baseball part, as you start to research, I was just so stunned by how meaningful baseball was to the people at the time. I mean, baseball is always meaningful, but it was so symbolic for people across cultures, across generations. It's where they gathered, watching baseball, keeping stats, understanding what people rooted against each other, but it wasn't personal. It was their rivalry. It was the way they I don't know, relieve their stress. So anyway, it was just really fun to research baseball for this book. It was also one of the hardest things I've ever done. We talked about this, like you have to get every stat right, every name of every player. And it was just so interesting to read and research all about baseball, which isn't sort of the main thing about the story, but it was such a crucial part of it,
So I have a question for you, because you kind of asked, like, isn't it interesting to have fantasy and baseball mixed up? What do you think about, like, I don't think I would necessarily have thought about putting a book that included baseball in poetry. So tell me about how you came to write this book in poetry. Was it always in poetry? Did you ever consider writing it in prose? And
yeah,
I think I might know the answer to this, but answer it anyway.
Well, no, I mean, it's a good question. I think, I always say for me, and I know you've written a verse novel and you write poetry, but for me, poetry is kind of my native language. So I tend to think in these imagistic pictures, and that's really how the book formed. Even when I was writing about baseball, I was trying to imagine, like Ricky Henderson and like what he was doing. So it helped me to write, about each player, about each situation. A lot of that stuff didn't make it in the story. But I will say, I write in this big book as I'm going. So I'm typing the poems, but also sketching out ideas. And there was a lot of note taking. So not straight prose, but so much note taking about what mattered, and then how to carry that through, in each chapter, which each poem in the story. It was really challenging in a good way. But I think knowing that how symbolic baseball is, I mean, from the smell of the grass to the crack of the bat, these kind of long-standing symbolic images, it was very fun to write, because the players in a way are, they're hyperbole, they're superhuman, they're fantastic beings, and in themselves they're kind of magical to the people watching. So I kind of embraced that.
Yes. And I also think that the way that you combine kind of the magical elements in your story with kind of the, I don't want to say mundane, but like everyday life, right? The everyday life of kids who are just riding their bikes and like going into the woods and like trying to like figure out school and like want their team to win in baseball. I think you do such a beautiful job incorporating the magical parts of that into it.
Oh, thanks.
So, I mean, it's also something that I don't see done that often in verse novels. So, bravo.
I think that's something that I appreciate. I mean, that's something that I wanted to incorporate was, this ancient magic of an older world entering into a newer, more modern world. And what would that look like? What does that look like in a world where these things exist but don't belong? Like ancient magic, ancient traditions clash with the modern world, and they create their own energy, like a little bit of chaos. So it was, really interesting and fun to write about how this kind of Jewish mythology and folklore, this ancient magic would clash, but sort of be made alive in sacred rituals of their faith, but then also like connect and clash intergenerationally, and everyone being aware of it. Like, I know this is real, but it doesn't belong here anymore. And that's something that creates its own tension. So it was challenging and fun to write about that, because I think you said it earlier, comedy is a magical place, right? When there's things going on there. And I know for sure as kids, like you go places and you're like, this place is magic. I still do it as an adult. I think you probably do it too, but like there's something about where we are right now. It's magical, and it's capturing a truth, but but we have to contend with that with all our logic and ideas and beliefs and that kind of thing.
And and I know I'm just gonna say one more thing that I don't know because it just occurred to me now is that the earth, the land that these people live on, and kind of what it means to each of the characters is such an important theme in your book. And I hadn't really thought about it as in this way, but when you mentioned, introducing the book about the immigrants all coming to this place, that reminded me of like, as an immigrant myself, of like, you come from a different place and then you come to a new home and this land is suddenly your land, right? And you bring with it all these traditions from wherever you came from. And whether you know it or not, like your children and their children are also like, part of that whole thing. So I just love that theme of the land itself having magic. And of course there's an earthquake in your story. I mean, it's like, oh my goodness. I mean, that's incredible. I just love how every time I read your book, or at least think about it, I think of more things.
Well, I feel the same way about your book because your books cover so many areas, and whenever I'm reading your stuff, I'm saying your stuff because everybody probably knows that you have many books that are out, picture books and novels. But even in this book, I was so connected with the characters, and it was like joyful and interesting. And then there's this background of magic, but then you also include math.
Yes.
Which I know you're a scientist, doctor person, but can you just... I mean, you don't have to have math, yet you do. So can you talk about the role of math, or like why?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a nerd from way back, and I love math. And I loved math, like riddles and puzzles and all that stuff when I was a kid. And my family, this includes my children and my husband. We're the weird family that fights over the logic puzzle book when we have to get on an airplane. Because we're like, I want to do that now. Like, do you took all the hard puzzles. Like, what's wrong with you? So we're just strange like that. So I was like, oh, I just want to include a couple of kids in this book that like love that stuff. And my son was on a math team when he was a kid, and it was not the kind of math team where you go to other schools and compete. It was like it met after school once a week, and they just had this like test that they would take at the end of the year. And the teacher would say, it's not a test, it's a contest. And really the goal was to just kind of get the best score you could and beat your previous score kind of thing. And it was so cool because a lot of these math problems had like very little to do with math, or like they had some math, but the key was to see enough of them so that you knew what the trick was so you could do it fast. Because otherwise you would take so long to do it the long way that you would never get through the whole thing. And I just loved watching that. And like part of what they did every week when they met was they would go up and show people how they solved the problems. And it was so cool to see 3 different kids solve the same problem 3 different ways and come up with the same answer. So I think math is magical in that way. So I thought that was really fun. And so I don't know if I've ever said this before to you, but the theme of this book is a math metaphor. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it literally showed up in my head, and I was like, oh, that's a math metaphor. Clearly, this is what these puzzles are leading to. And then I had the fun of like figuring out how to set up the puzzles so that the answers to the puzzles all led to this kind of math metaphor. But that was fun.
Now I want to go reread and make sure I know what it is.
You know what it is, I'm sure.
I know I do, but I keep thinking about how okay, that's so amazing. You've always loved like puzzle books, right?
Yeah, always. Yeah.
That's always been a thing for you, yeah.
Yeah. And I always loved, when I was a kid, I always loved to read books about kids who were solving puzzles. So that, now I get to write them. Isn't that crazy? I don't know that I ever would have predicted that as a kid. Like if you had told me that I would one day write books that I wanted to read when I was a kid, I would have been like, you're crazy.
No, but one of the things I love about your books, and this book in particular, is as one of those kids who would say, oh, there's math in that book, and I confess that that's not just me. I was sort of math is not for him person for a long time. Like teachers would say, that's a separate story. but I love how you integrate math so organically in the narrative. Like it's so, and that's important because I think often, I have 3 middle grade aged ish kids, and there's a big separation between like, oh, they're a STEM kid. That's a STEM book, and sort of putting it over here where I think you did such a beautiful job in this book of integrating the math into the narrative. So you don't have to be like it is a STEM book, but it's not only that. It's not categorized only by that.
Yes, and I think that the secret is that math and STEM topics are in our world organically, right? So that's the thing, is that we don't have to, you don't have to be an engineer to have to do math or contend with math or enjoy math. You know what I mean? So we should just demystify it a little bit, because literally when you're calculating the tip in a restaurant, you're doing math, right?
Yes, yeah.
Or, when you're trying to divide up, the number of cookies, I'm obsessed with baking, equally, you're doing math. So it's all those things are things that kids have to deal with every day. And they should be kind of fun. So I love writing books where the kids love something and they bring that love of whatever it is to the kid reader.
Me too. I love that about your books in particular. I think kids are empowered when they read your books, and I think that's what, and I know that's something I hope for in my own books, right? Is we want to empower kids to feel like it's not just a hero that does it. It's everyone,
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, I think we've got I think we've got time for another couple of questions between you and me, and then we've got a bunch of questions in the queue here. So one of the things, and I think we touched upon this briefly with the magic in your book, can you talk a little bit about the sacred in the Magical Imperfect and what it means, and how you thought about it and brought it into this book in such a beautiful way?
Yeah, this so for me, the sacred is, I think, so important in across cultures, in every culture. In Magical Imperfect, there's a strong Jewish faith that comes with the grandfather, and
he is my favorite character in the whole book, I have to say.
He's great. I love Jacob. Anyway, so he has a really strong faith, and for him, it is the direct link to his ancestors, to where he comes from. It is the most important thing. And even though he's been through so much, coming across the ocean, fleeing the Holocaust, making it to new shores, it's what sustained him. And of course, his son, Eitan's father, is kind of struggling with his faith, is struggling with the sacred. But they still manage to meet, for Shabbat and for high holidays. And as a kid, I know I witnessed a lot of struggles about the sacred, that it existed, but different people in the family had different ideas about what it meant. And as a kid, you witness that. It's really volatile. It's difficult, but also, a lot of things come out of that. And so I really wanted to explore in this book how Eitan lives in the middle of that tension between the father and the grandfather, who are figuring out what life is doing to them, and how the sacred kind of tears them apart, but also brings them together and sustains them. And, Eitan doesn't have the answers necessarily. He just is trying to be the best kid he can be, given the circumstances. And I think that's real for a lot of young readers, that it's not up to us. It just exists, and we see it hurting and helping the people around us.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I also think that one of the hardest things about growing up is when you realize that the grown-ups don't have all the answers and that they're also struggling. And it's, in a way, sometimes as a kid, you're like, come on, shouldn't you know, right? Shouldn't you have figured this out by now? But the truth is, we're all figuring it out all the time.
Maybe because we're parents. I just think I think about, I want my kids to see adults as real people going through real things, but also knowing that they deeply love their children, even if they're struggling, having a hard time. And I think it's great when books can represent that. I know I try to do that the best I can.
Absolutely. Okay, I have one last question, and then we've got a bunch of questions
Okay.
in the chat. So my question to you is, what surprised you in writing this book? Like, just name one thing that while you were writing this book, you were like, oh.
Okay, this just popped in my brain. But what surprised me was how emotional it was to write it. I knew it would be because it deals with themes, but I think because my wife deals with eczema, and she is a lot like Malia in the story, vibrant, dynamic, talented, incredible. But because I've lived firsthand with her dealing with eczema as a family, writing those scenes, as important and dynamic and important to the story as they were, I didn't expect to feel it so much and kind of relive through. And I know it makes for better writing to be more authentic like that. But it surprised me how much it impacted me. I think it speaks to how many things we carry with us. And I love that books can explore those things, I think, in a good and healthy way. And so the surprise was also that it helped the process of understanding and knowing those things about her, about us, what we've been through. Okay, what about you though? Surprise for you? I like that question.
Yeah, so, okay, the surprise for me was I wrote a scene without intending to write a scene, and then I found that I liked it. And I was like, oh, like it was a scene like that I did not. So one of the things about Much Ado About Baseball that is fun is that it involves kind of different generations of Indian immigrants. So Trish, the main character, her parents are both, they were both born and raised in the US. So her parents kind of like know what it's like to grow up in the US. And there's another boy on the team who is Ben's best friend, who also becomes really good friends with Trish, and his parents are immigrants. And one of the things that Trish finds out is that like Ubby is not that good at math, or at least not as good as math as his dad would like him to be. And like he's actually like making him like, you know, do math problems with him every afternoon, and like there's a lot of pressure there. And so Trish has a conversation with her dad where she's like, if I weren't good at math, if I didn't like it, would that upset you? And he's like, no, it wouldn't bother me. And she's like, well, why is Ubby's dad like this? And her dad says, you know, I know what that was like. My dad was worried about me because I really wasn't a math guy. The reason why my dad was allowed to immigrate to this country is because he had a certain kind of job, right? He had, you know, a technical job, and he had to be really good at math in order to do that. And he was afraid that if I didn't have that same type of job, that I would like not be able to find a job and I would just be, you know, destitute. So he's like, I think that Ubby's dad is just worried about him and he wants him to do well. And she's like, and so she can't even comprehend this. And her friend is kind of, you know, dealing with it, and it gives her a different perspective. Like, oh, this is not just like you need to be good at this because you need to be good at this. He's like, it's because a parent cares about their child and wants them to, you know, have a bright future, wants them to do well. So it was just an interesting scene that like popped into my head, and I ended up writing it, and I was like, does this have anything to do with anything else in the book? And then I was like, you know what? I like it. I think it's good. And my editor liked it too. So there we go. It stayed.
I love it. I love that. What a great surprise.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see.
Questions.
Questions. Okay, one of them disappeared. Oh no. One of them asked about being a plotter versus a pantser, but that disappeared. Are you a plotter or a pantser?
Both. I don't know how to even answer that question. Sometimes it's all going on. A lot of times I'm plotting everywhere. So I don't know. I suppose I should know that more, but yeah.
Oh, well, that's okay, because I am both. I call myself a pantser.
Yes. Are we allowed to be both? Okay.
Yes, we're allowed to be. We are. We're writers. We're allowed to be anything. I generally know my big plot points. I often know the ending to a book. I often weirdly know the last line of the book. And then I have to gotta figure out everything in between. But here's the thing. I don't write like a really, really detailed outline. I don't I don't do like every scene by scene. Like I don't plot that out ahead of time. I just know generally what's going on, and then I write the scene, and sometimes I surprise myself. So there comes the pantsing. But I think some of the most lovely scenes come out of that.
No,
Same way.
Pretty much. I mean, I feel like for me, I have the plot in mind, but then I just write like crazy. And then I just put as many things, and then I have 2 folders, and one is like yes, and one is maybe, and I don't know, I'm simplifying, but really, it's been a good process. I think the more I write and the more projects I work on, the more I'm organized, because there's so many characters, and I think it's growth, and I always want to be growing as a writer.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's kind of how I see it. Not to say one's better than the other, but I think the idea of it being both is really important.
Yes, because I also think that we want to be able to surprise ourselves. But sometimes, I know there are a lot of writers in the audience who know about this. Sometimes you can actually sell a book to a publisher without writing the whole thing. Like you can write a proposal, which means you have to write a synopsis that makes sense, and you write a few chapters. But in order for a synopsis to make sense, you need to have a plot that you know. So that's why it's useful to plot ahead of time. Okay, so let's see. More questions. What was the most interesting thing you learned while doing research for your book? Was there any fun fact you wanted to include that didn't make the final edit?
Ooh. How about you? Is there anything that comes to mind? I'm thinking.
So, fun fact. So my book is like so fantastical that I didn't do a lot of facts, but I will tell you, I had so much fun making up the math problems for this book, the math puzzles. And I did a lot of research for that. Like I did a lot of like remembering the kinds of math puzzles that my son did when he was in middle school. And I did a lot of weird calculations. I was sitting there going, I need the answer to be this. How in the world do I make the answer become this? And so I like went through, like, I thought I was going to ask my son to do it because he's like a very mathy guy, or my husband, but you know what? They were both busy. So I just had to come up with it myself. So that was one of the really fun things that I did. And all the other weird, nerdy math stuff ended up in the back matter of the book. So like we have baseball statistics and how they're calculated. I have a Sudoku puzzle. I have all the secret tricks that math people do to find out if a number is divisible by another number. Like I had so much fun with all that stuff.
How about you, Chris? There were so many things that were fun, fun facts, but a lot of them, what comes to mind is, and it's a little spoilery, but there's some stuff about the golem in here,
Yes.
So
one of my favorite things.
Researching about, magical, mythical creatures, and, how many times I wrote scenes about those things that didn't quite make it in because they didn't fit with it. But I learned so many fun facts about Jewish folklore and mythology, and more beliefs about it now. That stuff was so much fun to learn. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So much fun. Oh, okay. There's one that got upvoted here.
Oh,
how did your experiences in writing and publishing a sophomore novel differ from writing and publishing a debut? Oh, and that's from Amy Lucido, our friend, our fellow
Amy,
debut.
good question.
Yay, fellow 2019.
You should answer this, Amy. Okay. How is it different? Well, there's the pandemic. That's a big part of it.
Okay, but wait, no, but was writing this novel harder or different than writing the first novel?
I don't know. For this novel, put it this way, All of Me was written over a period of a couple of years, and Imperfect was written over months. And so I don't know if it was harder or easier, but it was, I felt like I had my writing muscles were like in shape, and I was ready, and the story was ready to come out. And I think, I know this was a really hard time, and is a hard time still for people, but as an introverted person, and being at home was helpful in the writing process. And so the writing of it was still grueling and awesome, like writing always is. Full of joy and headaches and throwing things against the wall. But publishing had more mystery because we didn't know if events would be live or how the book would get out or how people were doing or who even wants to read. Thankfully, people are finding a lot of joy and solace in books. So I think that was a big difference. It just felt like a lot more unknowns where, the debut year was a lot more like Wonderland, like what is happening? And now you had some expectations built in, but the world had turned upside down. I don't know. What do you think? Not exactly.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So Much Ado About Baseball was the second novel I wrote. It is the third novel that was published. It was really hard for me. I had been thinking about this book for a long time. Like even like when I first finished revising, like the first time Midsummer's Mayhem, I was thinking about this book and like trying to figure it out. But then I like revised Midsummer's Mayhem. So I was like, I want this book to come next. Like I want it to happen. But I really had a hard time. I struggled with it. This was the book that like I joined a new critique group and I said to my friends, I said, whoever said I knew how to write a novel, I have no idea how to write a novel. It was all a lie. It was a fluke. And so it was really hard. But you know what? Honestly, this is how because with your debut novel, literally nobody is waiting for it. Nobody cares. You can take as long as you want to and it's fine. But with this novel, you're kind of like, okay, like I want people who read the first one to read this one and they kind of need to like not be 10 years older. So it's like, come on, let's get going. But I think one of the things that you realize with each book is that it's different, but it's like a different journey. But you can fall back on those same skills that you used with your first novel, and then you can like figure out the next one, even when you're struggling with it. So I feel like just like figuring out the synopsis and making myself do that, even though I hated synopses, like made me figure this out to the extent that I could write it. So then that made me happy. So long answer, but totally. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. What was your favorite scene to write in these books?
Oh, I know mine.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, well, it probably will change, but right now, and I know that it was horrible and difficult, but I loved writing the earthquake scenes. I knew right away that I wanted to write them in time increments and short blasts of poems. I knew the images and the scenes, so I held off on writing them till I got there because I wanted to experience it. So I loved writing those moments the most. So I don't know. I have a favorite part of my own book. I guess that's weird, but I love writing those.
Okay, I'm going to tell you about this scene that just makes me laugh every time I think about it. There is I don't even know what to call it. It's not a puzzle. There's like a game that Trish introduces the team to that's called This Is a Stick. And so she'll be like, okay, this is a stick, and this is a stick, and this is a stick. Is this a stick? And then people have to say yes or no. And there is a trick to it, okay? So Trish is really sure that Ben, who is another math puzzle kind of guy, will get this immediately. And he has no idea what the trick is. And he gets more and more frustrated until they finally, there's a big blow up and he's like, you're not my friend. Like, you're not being nice to me. Like, go away. And she's like, wait, no, I thought this was going to be something you were good at. And it just makes me laugh. I'm sorry, because there are kids that are they're people, not just kids. They're people that are really good at all kinds of intellectual things, but then something as simple as there is a silly trick that you need to pay attention to can stymie them and it drives them mad. But I love that stuff.
Yeah, no, that's so good.
All right, let's see.
I don't know how much time we have left, but I want to make sure we get. What's our next question here?
Okay, so are there any authors that inspire you or you feel have had an influence on how you write?
Go for it.
Oh, I don't know.
So many.
Okay, so we're both. Well, let's just go back to the way back, right? We're both Tolkien fans. We're both, C.S. Lewis fans. We love that stuff. The classic fantasy literature of our youth. It's not even our youth.
Yeah.
of other people's
of youth. Just youth. With a
of youth,
battle.
exactly. Always youth. Exactly. And like sci-fi movies and all that kind of stuff. Like yes, I'm inspired by all of that stuff. And I just love places that I love the possibilities of other worlds existing. So I try and bring those into my books.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you have any other answers?
I mean, I just think it's a little overwhelming to think of all the people, but I can say that I feel like the middle grade world of authors is so inspiring right now. There are stories in every direction happening that I can't even keep up. I'm reading a few arcs here and there. I mean, I don't want to start down the list right now, but I can just say like middle grade books are really inspiring right now because people are unafraid to go into topics and the writing is so good. And it gives me a lot of hope reading these really great books. I think they're going to stick and people are going to, kids who are reading them are going to really, I don't know, they're going to grow from these. So.
Oh, absolutely. No, I don't want to name like specific names because I'm gonna there are too many to name. But I love middle grade right now. I don't even have any middle grade children at home anymore, and I still read it. Like I just love it so much. Absolutely, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you speak about the feedback your editors offered you? Was there a suggestion which resulted in a great deal of revision? Was there feedback you received which you felt really improved your books?
Do you want to? I'll go. I mean, yeah, lots of great feedback for sure. I don't know about a great deal, but I think anytime you're doing revision, it's a process. Like every ounce of revision is taken very seriously. And I would say like in my debut, there was a lot more because that book was 70,000 words in a first draft and it had to be cut in half. So there was just going to be revision no matter what. This book was shorter from the beginning, but I was really thinking a lot more about audience and fortunate enough to have the same editor for this book and we were working really well together and she's amazing. And especially working with my agent as well, like it felt like a team effort to make the story the best it could be. And I really had audience in mind. I knew a lot more. And so I felt like the feedback was like a team effort toward writing the best book possible. I know that sounds very idyllic, but and there were hard issues and parts, but that overall, that's kind of what it was like.
My same editor for Midsummer's Mayhem, Charlie Lagunas, was my editor for Much Ado About Baseball. He's wonderful. He loves baseball. So there was a lot of great baseball kind of conversations happening during the edits. Like, Trish is a pitcher. Like, how many kinds of pitches would she really have? She's 12 years old. Like, all that kind of stuff. And like just making sure that all the baseball stuff was actually correct, which was really interesting. So that was one aspect. And I did rely on my husband and son to do some quick math stuff. I was like, listen, this is the situation. They started with these batters. We need to end up with these batters. And what should the score be? We're in the 6th inning. And they were like, oh, blah, 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 blah. It should be this. And I was like, okay, sounds good. So they had some calculation they could do that I was like, okay. The other thing that my editor was really wonderful about doing is, this is a kind of take on Much Ado About Nothing, right? So about two people who can't stand each other who end up being friends because of the machinations of the people around them. And so a lot of what he suggested too was enhancing the Shakespearean aspects of this book, and that was really fun as well.
That's so cool.
So another question: what makes writing a novel in verse the most challenging?
Oh my gosh, that is such a good question. And in our like 2 minutes or something we have left.
No, we have like 10. We have 10
really? Okay, good.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like with novel in verse, in a way, because there's so much space on the page, I mean, this is what comes to mind is I want to cover a lot of ground, but I also have to keep the words tight. Otherwise, you're going to have an 800-page book. And that no one wants that. Not in a middle grade novel in verse. So I think for me, it was really an exercise in what can be left out. I feel like poetry inherently is built that way, that you're always looking to see like, what can I remove or leave out and say it even better than with all the words. And that's part of the poetic process. I think a novel in verse in this way with kind of harder limits and deadlines. That was the hardest thing, was what to cut out, what to remove, and how to say things more effectively with audience in mind in terms of things like action, you know. And so for me, that was a big part of it.
Interesting. Yeah, my second novel, Red, White, and Whole, came out in February, and that was and that's unrelated to these two books. I feel so as a picture book writer, I feel like I do this. I have practice in this. It is like boiling things down to the most essential elements and finding the words that are most important and then putting them in a way that conveys the exact emotion you're trying to elicit, which is challenging. Yeah. But
and the
so
other
much
thing, well, I would just add this because something I'm learning lately as I'm meeting with, like, at school visits and stuff like that, like talking to readers, is they're participating with the verse novel, you know. And so in a way, as a writer, I don't want to overdo it. I want to make sure there's space for them to connect with the story. That's what verse is trying to do, is give them an image, let them feel it and bring themselves to it. I think all books do that, but so I think that was really hard to think about, because I don't want to over explain something. I want to leave that space. I'm learning how to do that more and more with each book. But.
Oh, I think you do it wonderfully.
Thanks.
Wonderfully. All right, let's see. Okay. Do you write multiple books simultaneously, and do you confuse the characters? Ha
Do you?
Chris, I'm going to ask you that.
I am constantly forgetting names, and I have so many funny stories to tell. I need to write them down about this, because I know who they are in my head, but I'm constantly mixing up the names of these characters and who they are. And I know that I'm not alone, so I say this with no shame. What I really want to say is I'm a master, and I am completely in control of all my characters and their destinies and the plots they're living in, but it's just not true. It's all happening so fast at the same time. There, I bare my soul to you.
I don't usually write more than one novel at a time, but right now I have 3 novels that I'm thinking about, and I'm not confusing characters. I'm just utterly confused as to which one I should be working on at what time, like at what point in time. So that's my challenge right now.
Yeah.
I think it's really.
Oh.
No, go ahead.
No, just especially at the idea stage, right? Because
you're like, oh, this would be great.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Everything's very sparkly. I know. When I first started writing, I will just tell you, I was worried that I would run out of ideas. And now I very quickly realized that I have so many ideas, I will never be able to write them all, ever.
Right. It's the opposite. I thought it would be that way, and it's the opposite. I feel like it's just more.
Yes. Okay. So are either of you thinking of writing more books in these so far 2-book universes?
Wow.
Oh.
I am now. No, it's such a great question. And I think so. I think.
Yeah.
I can't help but have to create and think about continuity in the novels. It's just, I can't help it.
Yes.
And obviously
and this answers another question too, which is, can you tell us what you're currently working on, or if you have something in the works? Okay, so I'm secretly working on another book in this universe. Sharon says I am now. That's what I hope to hear. Yay. Yeah, so I'm hoping to figure that out. My next novel is coming out next fall with HarperCollins, and it is a book about musical twin sisters who grow apart, and how music brings them back together. And it involves a music summer camp.
That's so awesome.
Which I wish I had always gone to a music summer camp, because now I regret that. My son is now a counselor at a music summer camp, and it's so awesome.
Amazing.
How about you, Chris?
Where are we though? What are we currently working on? Question?
Yeah, what are you working on? What do you have in the works? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always writing all kinds of projects. I have the very cliche stuff I can't talk about answer to that. But yeah, lots of fun projects that are connected in some ways to the books that have been written. And
Woo!
right now I have lots of ideas, and yeah, I'm excited.
Yay.
So mysterious. Go on.
So mysterious. Yes. Okay, what else do we have here? Do you have any recommendations of any middle grade novels to read right now?
Yes, but here we
All
go.
of them.
All of them. I know. I'm so scared.
Okay, so Amy Lucido is in the audience. Her next book, Recipe for
Disaster
is coming out soon, right?
Fall, I think.
That is a must read. It looks so amazing, and it's got all kinds. It's like a crazy kitchen with all kinds of disasters in it. I'm also looking forward to Josh Levy's follow-up to 7th Grade versus the Galaxy, 8th Grade versus the Machines. That looks amazing.
I can't wait. If people need to read more Josh Levy, and they don't understand. Yeah, he's just such an incredible writer. Yeah.
So he is an attorney, and you can tell by some of the things in his science fiction universe. It is so much fun. So funny. You will laugh and you will cry.
I will say my 10-year-old just read The Adventure Is Now by Jessica Redman. And she is an extraordinary writer. I think that's her third middle grade book, but she's still talking about it. And that's really a good mark of something. So I would recommend that, because we're always talking about it. And
that's so sweet.
Yeah.
Gillian McDonoug's latest one, These Unlucky Stars, is absolutely beautiful too. Loved it.
Yep. Great book.
Yeah. So many books, all the books, read all of them.
And they're all here, and I'm just going to hold back because I know it's the same thing. I could just start letting them come out, but those are the ones that came up immediately.
Yes, the dreaded what book do you recommend conversation. Because
all of them.
Are you
all the books.
My response to this question is literally always like, are you sure you're ready to have this conversation? Because sit down, it's going to take a while.
To the middle grade section and just scoop them
read
up.
all of them.
Every book on the shelf, just swoop.
Yeah.
You know the like memes of like when you have the shopping cart and you like push everything off the shelf into the shopping cart. That, but with our books. Come do it. Mysterious Galaxy is open for browsing now, guys. You can come and buy every book on the middle grade shelf. Well, it was such a pleasure having you both tonight. Thank you so much to our audience for joining us. We had so many lovely readers join us tonight, which is great. I'm so glad we had so many people here to celebrate both of your new books this year. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Rajani, for joining us. Everyone, as a last minute reminder before we go, if you haven't bought either of these books, or if you want any of their previous books, you can click that green Buy Books button below our video, and that'll take you to the Mysterious Galaxy website. Chris is offering signed personalized books. We have both of his books, and we are getting signed personalized book plates from Rajani. So with that, everyone, I'm going to say goodnight and have a good one. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks,
we'll see you
everyone.
next time,
everyone.